How's everybody doing? I underestimated how interesting it would feel to rev the stereo sessions train back up. When thinking about the records that we did this go around, I have to, for one, give kudos to Kate. At a certain point last year, we realized that we hadn't had any records that really focused on the stories of women. And so I think we didn't even necessarily plan for today to be International Women's Day either. But we knew that this go around that we really had to overcorrect that oversight the first time. And as someone who spends a lot of time with records, spends a lot of time with Memphis records, I think that it should be stated somewhere at some time, so I'm gonna do it right now, that not enough women were given a spotlight in soul and rock and roll, in the blues and country and so on and so forth in this local music tradition. It just is not so. And particularly when you talk about records and not just singles, I mean that pool of people who were given, women who were given the opportunity to sing out, to shout out, to songwrite, to produce, all those things, that becomes an even smaller group of names you can list. So I'm excited that we can have this celebration on this day because we have a really tremendous storyteller and producer and human and woman here to share their story and share this record that I think largely is a testament to her vision, because the musicians, we don't quite know where they are, and this group didn't quite have much of a recording career thereafter. And so I'm excited for that. I'm excited for all those things. But also am excited that we get to kind of start and end Stereo Sessions this second season, sort of the same way we did last year. And that's with a record that really, serves that proof of concept for there needing to be a series that explores records that truly expands what we know about the Memphis sound. And so I'm glad that we have another record that kind of jumps right off the page. Companion last year was just really probably the best record to break the door wide open and say, okay, this is something that no one would have expected to come out of Memphis then or now. And so without any more ado, I'd like Miss Natalie Rosenberg to join us, if you would.
Thank you, Jared.
Yes, great to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, babe.
And, because sometimes, the projects like these have so much scope and so much to wrap their mind around and so many things to pay attention to. It's wonderful when we can do these stereo sessions where not only the people who are involved with the record, but someone who might have been influenced by the record or someone who's done even deeper listening than myself or anyone else on the WYXR staff, or someone else who can kind of point out some things that one would not be able to understand and know.
Thank you.
I think none of us here could speak from the perspective of a New Zealander or a Kiwi. I haven't quite figured that out yet, or if I don't know if that's a slur, so I don't want to use it. I want to be sensitive to that because I do think Kiwis are delicious. So I'd like to invite my Kiwi friend, Mr. Ben Stanley, up, who I think solidified for me that this record was special. I listened to it and I had it in my collection. I thought it was special. I was like, who else knows about this? Is anyone else talking about this? And a very fantastic article by Ben Stanley was in one of my favorite publications, Noisy by Vice, and I thought, oh shit, there is someone who cares about this record. There must be something to this. And that was many, many years ago, probably before I was a professional journalist and before I was a DJ or any of those things, just someone who liked Memphis music and liked the record. So Ben, we'd love to have you here as well. Been a fantastic guide through this record. Natalie, one more round of applause for her.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh.
I'd just like to, if we could, one, I mean, just allow you to say hello, and then we can get into your story before we talk about the record itself.
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you to all my good friends that go back to, I won't say what year it was, but some personalities here that you probably never got to hear, but they were great in their time, and they still are for that matter. So there's some people here that were in the music business and had a great time. We did back in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s. That was when Memphis, Tennessee, and the music business was really hot. You know, we had Stax, Sun. Who else did we have?
Royal Studios and High Records.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Is that me or
No,
you?
it's not. It's fine.
Anyway, we had Willie Mitchell and
Chips Moment in American Studios.
that's right.
Yeah.
We had a lot of music going on in Memphis, Tennessee. And I just happened to get lucky. Back then, there were very few women in the music business. We were the women in the background. The men took all the credit. No. But we were the creative people. And so as a matter of fact, Stax did an event for women of Memphis soul that told the story of people like Betty Berger. Let's see, I forget who else was in there.
Tanya Dice and Betty Crutcher, I believe, as well.
Right. Deanie Parker. Women that were in the business that never got the credit for doing what they did, really and truly. So, as a very young person back then, I was married to a musician and an attorney. We started a place called American Recording Studio at Thomas and Chelsea, where Chips Moman cut Dionne Warwick, Elvis Presley. Back then, the music business was very easy. Record companies could put 100 artists out, and hopefully one would hit with a hit record. So it was easy to get into the music business and also the radio business. George Klein was on WHBQ Memphis. He also had a program called Dance Party. He was the best friend of Elvis Presley, and he was a good friend of anybody in the Memphis music business. And my husband was an attorney, he was a musician. And so we were right there in there when there was really no competition, and everybody was having a blast. It was the garage bands of Memphis, Tommy Burke and the Counts, Flash and the Board of Directors. There were a lot of artists that came out of Memphis. They didn't have big hits, but they had southern hits, and they sold enough records to go make money at all the sock hops and places around in Memphis and Shelby County, making like $150 a night or something. And then, so because my husband was an attorney, I was kind of like the creative person, and all these bands would come to Seymour, and they'd say, we need a manager, and Seymour would sign them up. And then they needed somebody to produce their records. There was a little record company, a recording company called Sonic that Roland James had. It's like a little hole in the wall recording studio. And so we would take the garage bands of Memphis, cut a session, take an hour and a half, put the record out, and they became big hits, and George Klein would play it on the radio and on his TV show. As a result, we ended up, I had a chance to produce an artist by the name of Charlie Rich. He was lucky enough, after 15 years of hard work, to hit platinum and gold with Behind Closed Doors and The Most Beautiful Girl. And I had a chance to produce 4 sides on him at High Recording Studio. And that was pretty big because we traveled the United States and the world. As a result, every record that I produced, not every record, I had to put the name, my name's Natalie Rosenberg, and because I was a woman, I put N. Rosenberg, because I figured if they thought it was a woman producer, it wouldn't get the credit that a man would. So it was very interesting how that worked out. So it was just by luck and never giving up and just plowing ahead. I can tell you this, if you don't know, if you've never done anything before and you have a passion for what you want to do and you don't know how to do it, but you keep going anyway, Lady Luck can come and kiss you and you will have memories that will last a lifetime. Now, the New Zealand Trading Company came to us. We had built a recording studio called Universal Recording. It's over there. And it was a copy of the Stax recording company over there on Macklemore. These guys were show band. They were a show band. They had never cut a record before. They were the greatest guys I've ever met. Some of the best musicians I've ever met. And I had a chance to record an album on them in our studio. I still love every cut to this day. I still play it. And it's being heard. It's still being heard around the world. You know, Memphis music is still being heard around the world. So I hope you enjoy it. I certainly appreciate you all being here. And if you have any questions at all, I'll be happy to answer them.
How did they come to you?
Well, there was a man by the name of Ronnie Hoffman, who is an attorney. He was in a Playboy club in Chicago. And being a show band, the New Zealand Trading Company was on the Playboy circuit. And Ronnie heard him, and he said, Seymour, you've got to record this band. They're the greatest band I ever heard. So they came to Memphis, Tennessee, and they were very shy. They were just wonderful musicians. You can hear it. And I'll let Ben tell you what happened, how some of them went on to fame and fortune. But we recorded the album in about 3 days on a 16-track, and had an engineer by the name of Steve Stepanian, who went on to better things, went on to big studios as a recording engineer. So, and then that little picture goes back a way. It tells a little bit about me. I'm kind of embarrassed because this has been 40, 50 years ago that this all happened. And the good thing about it is it just keeps coming back. After I was in radio for about 30 years at WRVR, Kicks 106, K97, WDIA, WMC, I couldn't hold the job. No. Every move was a move up. So after 30 years in radio, people are still finding me because music lasts forever and around the world. And I guess everybody here loves music, and I hope you really enjoy the album. Thank you.
You know, I think we'll have more time for discussion later, but this is an album that truly speaks for itself, and you've done so much to speak for your story. Y'all want to jump right into it? Yeah. Cool. So if you've got the A's, you can listen to the A side out here, and if you've got the B's, you can listen to it in the smaller room there, and then we'll switch for side B. We're just gonna
They were a show band. So if you can imagine being in a nightclub and having all these guys play these songs, it's like having a natural high. Absolutely. I hope you enjoyed it.
Hey Natalie, who arranged this? Was there an arranger?
Well, yes. Who was the arranger? Do you know which one was the arranger? I think it was Maurice Moore, who was the piano player. He was from Great Britain, and he went on to play jazz concerts, and I think he had another group that he played all over Europe and Great Britain. Just a great guy. I mean, these people were so talented, and it was my privilege to be able to record them. I can
Is
tell
this
you.
their one album? Did they do other albums? or-
This was the only album they did. I can tell you that we tried to get them on different labels, on major labels. But they were so different at that time that they were playing rock and roll, Elvis and everything. There was no place for them. So they just went on to bigger and better things. They became Gloria Esteban's music director. They played with Stevie Wonder, Herbie Hancock. Who else? I think they went on to great. The ones that made it went on to really, really wonderful things because they were such great musicians.
Henry, you got a question?
I know you said that, but yes. Are any of them still alive?
No, they're all gone, sadly. Maurice Moore, who was my dear friend. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Unfortunately, they're all gone, but their music lives on, so we can enjoy them anytime we want. You can go, with the internet, it's unbelievable. I had no idea that anybody knew who the New Zealand Trading Company was, who little Natalie Rosenberg was. I had no idea. And all of a sudden somebody said, well, you're on the internet, Natalie. And I said, what? And so I started looking up all the things. You can go on the internet, pick up the New Zealand Trading Company, any artist that I had the good fortune to work with, garage bands of Memphis, Charlie Rich. You can hear all the music anytime you want. It's just incredible. So I hope you do.
Or if I may, if you go to Natalie's house, she's got every record she's on her jukebox.
I do have a jukebox with lots of 45s from Memphis music. So come on. Isaac Hayes did. He babysat for me.
Never let us forget it either.
Gary Allen, my son, can tell you about Sir Isaac. So.
John Joy, side 1, side A.
Yeah, that was great.
This isn't like one of those academic seminars. You can really make some noise if you enjoy side A. No offense to Natalie. I'll put something else on. I mean, we got a lot of records in here if you enjoy.
Unbelievable. This place is unbelievable. I had no idea. How many? 30,000?
I'm not sure. Where's
I think I
Jim?
read 30,000 albums, 45s.
About 30,000, 45s, about 14,000 albums.
Unbelievable. And you can come up here and hear it anytime you want for free. So all the music, anytime, you want to hear Booker T and the MGs or Al Green or
Charlie Rich.
Charlie Rich.
New Zealand Trading Company.
Poor little rich kids. Flash and the Board of Directors. I think he had an album. There's Flash over there.
Hey.
Flash had a great band. Greg Hamilton was right here, former DJ with a lot of radio stations.
Well, if we could jump back into the discussion of the record, Ben, we didn't get to you in the first side. That was not necessarily deliberate on my part, but I felt like we had such a great entree into the music, and again, we picked these records. Many of them, they tell their own story. I mean, their significance sort of leaps off the groove of the record. But for you, I mean, could you just set the stage? I mean, for where a record like this can even come from, what the culture of the people who have played this record, what the place that they come from is like. Well, the two sort of main members of the group, but also, I mean, what this record has meant to you and means to you as it continues to sort of weave in and out of your career.
Kia ora, JV. Yeah, I have to say, I didn't actually hear this record for the first time until I moved to Memphis, which is pretty wild, and certainly considering the fact that it truly was a trailblazing record in terms of New Zealand music, which has certainly been overlooked back in New Zealand. I have to say again, hearing it for the first time here, you walk down the street in New Zealand, no one would have heard of New Zealand Trading Company, which is a great shame. And the reason I say it's such a trailbreaking record, through the 1950s, 1960s, New Zealand bands were really only recorded in New Zealand. towards the end of the mid-60s, end of the 60s, some in Australia, but we're really talking Australasia, only 2 places. So for Kiwis to be recorded in the States, full stop, but here in Memphis, hot off, the success of Stax, was a considerable achievement, and more so than that, the 2 New Zealand members of the band, Kawana Watiri and Thomas Kinney, they're Māori New Zealanders, our indigenous people, and there's a track actually coming up on side B, Rua Moko, which is a tribute to the god of earthquakes and volcanoes in Māori. It's actually quite a clever song. What they do is they compare what the god of earthquakes can do to the powerful creative power of the sexual act. So a very, very cheeky little number. But to have a waiata means a song in Māori, to have a waiata recorded in the United States, 1970, that's pioneering. It really is, to put it in context. And for me, listening to the record for the first time, that is the song that really sticks out to me. And I think over time we're going to see New Zealand music and New Zealand music history really embrace that fact, that these guys were doing something that their friends back home in New Zealand weren't. Just take a step back, bit of context of the history of show bands. So in the 1950s, Māori show bands were the big show in town in New Zealand. Coming out of the Second World War, getting a bit more of a American, European influence on the music. Before that, the Māori show bands would play Māori waiata, but then you had them playing, again, more contemporary show tunes, Hawaiian numbers, and a little bit of comedy shtick in there as well. And if you listen to the New Zealand airwaves in the 1950s, there was a lot of Māori show tunes, big important groups, so the Howard Morrison Quartet, the Māori High Five, and the predecessor to New Zealand Trading Company, the Māori Haikwins. They went over to Australia, Sydney in 1960. The lineup was a lot different to what it would inevitably be here in Memphis. It was only actually Thomas Kinney, who was the rhythm guitarist, who was in that initial iteration. They had a bit of success over in there over the ditch. Went up to Europe and started playing clubs up there, and it was actually Sammy Davis Jr. Who inevitably gave them their break. He saw them at a very famous supper club in London and said, "You guys should give it a crack over in the States," which they did. And we're based here for the second half of the 1960s. Ended up in Chicago 1969. They cut a single with Cadet Records, which I believe is an offshoot of Chess. The lineup changed again. A couple of the Kiwi guys left. There was an Australian chap in the band as well. And you had the Cuban, Puerto Rican trio come in, once a backing group for Janis Joplin, which is pretty cool. And you had the two Māori boys in there, and as Natalie mentioned, Ronnie Hoffman saw them at the Playboy Club, and they're down here in Memphis. And I wonder what it would have been like for those two fellas coming here to Memphis in 1970. Thomas Kinney was from a town on the east coast of North Island, New Zealand, called Gisborne. At the time, there had been no more than 5,000 or 10,000 people, so a very, very small place, very remote back then. And Kawana Watiri, he's from an even smaller place called Putiki, which might have had about, 150, 200 people. It's probably smaller now, to be honest. So their eyes would have been like saucers coming here to Memphis. But yeah, I mean, again, going back to what I was saying before, really very much a trailblazing record, and certainly hoping in time it gets the honour it deserves back home, and yourself too, Natalie, for producing it.
What was life for you like coming to Memphis, years removed from this record we're looking at?
Yeah, well, this was Memphis pre-Stephen Adams too, so Kiwis were pretty thin on the ground out here. Look, I grew up on a sheep farm in the hill country, North Island, New Zealand, very remote. So landing here in Memphis was certainly very different. But you know, again, discovering this record and you know, finding a few other Kiwis around the traps here. And you know, Steve-O coming up from New Orleans and really making a name of himself here with the Grizz. Yeah, the connections are really appearing and strengthening, and yeah, it's been a fun ride. And I live on McNeil, a couple of blocks over now, so got a young daughter too, so I'm here to stay, you know.
What's your work here? What are you doing?
I'm a journalist. I worked for Vice for a long time and various bits and pieces, but I attempt to lend a bit of a New Zealand view on life in America for folks back home in Australia and New Zealand. Certainly the last 5 or 6 years, which is the time I've been here, has been a confusing time, and I've been trying to make a little bit of sense of that for you folks back home.
Out of curiosity, where are you from in New Zealand? I worked in Palmerston North.
Oh, Palmy North. Yeah. My uncle and aunt live in Palmy. I'm from a very, very small place called Rangataiki. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's worth a visit. You're all welcome.
Natalie, did you get a sense that the fellas were out of water when they were in town? I mean, I guess they've been in Chicago for some time.
I can't tell you, they were just so nice, so respectful, so shy, believe it or not. And they came to the house, we rehearsed a little bit, I got to know them just a little bit, and they were just lovely. And when we got through recording the album and we got out into the studio and we all listened to the album on big speakers like this, the looks on their faces, I don't know that they had ever recorded anything. I didn't know they had another record, but to hear it on big speakers in a big studio, the look on their faces was like a little kid that just discovered Santa Claus. I just can't tell you, their eyes got big and they loved it. They absolutely loved it. So I just can't tell you how great they all were, how talented they were. And it was a joy to be with them. I just can't tell you, the music has to speak for itself. But they were wonderful guys. No drugs, no drama, just fun, just music. And music touches everybody, so we all spoke the same language.
By the way, no drugs, no drama, that's a line in our national anthem.
You know, for you, this LP, was it a challenge? You know, how did it stretch you as a producer?
Loved every minute of it. You know, I guess you have to have a little bit of chutzpah going for you when you go into a recording studio with people you've never met before, in a studio that was just built, and everything was new. And so I always felt like if you don't know what you're doing, you just keep going and pretend that you do. And that seemed to work for me in the beginning. So Lady Luck kissed me, and you know, if you have a passion for anything, if you love music or whatever you do, you just go for it. You don't put any barriers in front of you saying, I've never done this before, I can't do it. Somebody will talk about you, I'm gonna fail, it's gonna be awful. Those thoughts never came into my head. It was full speed ahead, let's have fun, let's do it and see what happens.
Well, you know, there are some other artists who release singles on Memphis Records, your label with Seymour. There's Billy Butler and Infinity, which was it Spencer or Percy Wiggins, which of the two?
It was Spencer,
Yeah.
Spencer Wiggins.
And one of my favorites, I'm losing his last name, was James Spencer. Take This Woman Off the Corner.
Take This Woman, oh, listen. There's some great music that came out of Memphis that made hits on the R&B stations. We didn't know about it in the top 40 stations, but a lot of blues came out of Memphis, a lot of R&B came out of Memphis. There were artists like Roosevelt Jameson wrote a song called That's How Strong My Love Is, that James Carr recorded, and the Rolling Stones recorded it. So whenever the Rolling Stones came close to Memphis, Tennessee, they would come visit Roosevelt. And in fact, he was a good friend of mine, and we produced a couple of records together. So lots of good stories about music.
The label seemingly short-lived, and also your ownership of the studio. Can you tell me a bit about just the decision-making behind that, the business? I mean, why only one full LP on this label with such great talent around it, and a home studio to record in?
That's a long story, but it turns out that Isaac Hayes and Jerry Butler bought Universal Recording Studio from Seymour and me. They bought it and went on with it. And we went on to Charlie Rich and behind closed doors.